Okay, so we are in Masechet Eruvin, Daf Zayin. The main topic of today is still on Chumrot. Can you follow two Chumrot of two opposing opinions? Right? Does that make any sense to do? This came up because we had the people of Nehar De'ah, where they had some kind of a crooked mavoy, and they were machmir, both according to Shemuel and according to Rav. Shemuel said that we consider it as if it goes straight through, so it's an open mavoy, and Rav says that you have to put a door on one of the sides. So he's also machmir, and they were machmir according to both opinions. And we said we had a problem. How could they do that? We have this tradition from Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai. If you follow the chumrot of both, then that person is called the kisil. You should not follow the chumrot of both. And we solved it by saying that Rav said halacha ve'en morin ken, that Rav in his leniency, when he said his leniency, did not actually think that that's the halacha, but rather he agreed with Shemuel as per his stringency. And therefore, in fact, we could say they were following Rav in all of his opinions. Okay, so we were able to solve it that way. However, there is another tradition in Rav. According to the opinion that Rav says that is the halacha, and that you have to put an opening in the door frame as an open alleyway and not just posts. You have to put a door. So then what are we going to do? Because in that case, the people of Nehar De'ah are in fact following the chumrot of both Rav and Shemuel, and we don't want them to be kisilim. So how are we going to resolve it? Okay, so this is a very important principle, that one can follow stringencies of two different opinions as long as they don't contradict each other. In other words, Rav and Shemuel were talking about two different subjects. One subject is a bent L-shaped mavoy considered straight open or closed? That's one subject. You could decide what you want there. Another subject is whether an open mavoy needs doors or just a doorway. And so you can be machmir here and be machmir there. You don't have to be consistent because these are two different subject matters. However, when it's the very same point that two different halachot depend on that one principle, that's when it makes no sense to be machmir both ways. Here's a nice example. Kigon. Shidra v'gulgolet, like a spine and a skull. This is regarding the laws of tum'ah. A dead body, everybody knows, makes something tameh. If it's a full dead body, then not only touching or carrying, but if it's in a home, then that corpse, that tum'ah spreads throughout everything in the home. But that's only if it's a full body or a major part, like the spine, the whole spine, or the skull. Those by themselves still cause tent impurity. However, if it's less than that, just one vertebrae or just one piece, then it would not cause tent impurity. So that's the Mishnah is discussing. Hashidra v'hal gulgolet shehasru. You have a spine or you have a skull, but it's missing. It's not complete. How much does it have to be missing in order to say it's an incomplete spine and therefore the impurity does not spread throughout the tent? It's got to be missing two vertebrae. If it's missing only one, we still consider it to be full. Bet Hillel says even if it's missing only one vertebrae, it's considered an incomplete vertebrae. And so you see Bet Hillel here is more lenient, right? Because even if it's missing only one, the tumah will not spread. Bet Shammai is more machmir. If it's a skull, then a size of a drill hole, some kind of standard drill size, if it has a hole in it, Bet Shammai says it's not a full skull. Bet Hillel says a smaller amount, a hole big enough that if that hole was there when the person was alive, he wouldn't be able to make it. That's a much smaller hole. And so again, Bet Hillel here is more lenient. Even the tiniest hole will mean that it's not a full skull and impurity does not spread. Okay, so that's one issue. Now there's a second issue that's dependent upon the same principle. Terefa means an animal that is sick and wouldn't make it, wouldn't survive for long, for a year. So in this case, what do you call a terefa? If it's something that's missing, so they have the same machloket. Bet Shammai says if it's missing two vertebrae, then it's terefa. It can't last that long. Bet Hillel says if it's missing even only one vertebrae, it's considered terefa. So in this case, you see that Bet Hillel is more stringent, right? Because even just one vertebrae means that it's the thing is taref, and if Bet Hillel in that case would say it's okay. Similarly with the skull, have this very small hole, right? You kill an animal and you find a very small hole. Bet Hillel would say taref, you can't eat it. Bet Shammai would say, oh, it's a very small hole, it's okay, it's kasher. So this is an interesting case where you follow Bet Hillel, that's fine, right? Then you're going to be lenient in the case of impurity, but stringent in the case of terefa. Or Bet Shammai, then the other way around, right? So in a case like this, one should not be mahmir regarding tenth impurity and mahmir regarding terefa, because then you're following two different principles. The same, right? The question is, what is considered a full skull, a full vertebrae, and that has to be the same definition for tenth impurity and for its health. So in that case, that's called a fool if someone follows Bet Shammai in the first and Bet Hillel in the second. But if it's two different issues and you want to be mahmir according to one authority in here and one authority there, but the logic of their rulings does not contradict each other, then that's totally fine. And so that would be the case here regarding the people of Nahar De'ah. Okay. Hold on. Even regarding this principle, is that true when the same principle is contradicted, that we don't follow it? We have another story where the Rabbi Akiva does follow two contradictory rulings. Okay, Mishnah talks about this is in Masechet Rosh Hashanah. When is the new year for trees? We all know Tu B'Shvat, right? Tu B'Shvat is a new year for trees. We make a nice party of it, but back then this had halachic significance. Anything that grows on a tree, if you harvest it before Tu B'Shvat, then you have to give maaser from the previous year. If you harvest from it after Tu B'Shvat, you have to give maaser for the next year. And these are different types of maaser, right? There's a maaser that you give, that you eat yourself, right? Called maaser sheni. During a 7-year cycle, the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the cycle, you give maaser that the owner brings to Jerusalem. And the other years, the third and the sixth year, you give that maaser to a poor person. So for example, if it's going from the second year to the third year of Shemitah, right? So if you do it before Tu B'Shvat, then you have to eat it in Jerusalem. If you wait till after Tu B'Shvat, then you would have to go and give it to the poor person. So Tu B'Shvat is actually the opinion only of Bet Hillel. Bet Shammai says that it's Rosh Chodesh Shevat, right? 15 days earlier is the Rosh Hashanah, is the new year for trees. So in this case, the Rabbi Akiva gathered in Etrog on Rosh Chodesh Shevat, which means, according to Bet Shammai, he would have to give maaser for the upcoming year. According to Bet Hillel, before Tu B'Shvat, and he has to give maaser for the previous year. So what did Rabbi Akiva do? He gave both types of maaser. Okay. All this, by the way, is independent of the maaser you give to a Levi. So in this case, he actually gave 3 maasers. He gave 30% of the etrog that he gathered. So you see in this case that Rabbi Akiva was machmir according to 2 different contradictory opinions. Either Rosh Hashanah for Ilanot is Rosh Chodesh or it's Tu B'Shvat. Can't be both, and yet he followed both. So you see that this contradicts the principle that we just established. How could he do that? רבי עקיבא גם הרי הסתפק ולא ידע אי בית הלל, באחד בשבט אמור, אי בחמיסר שבת אמור, רבד אכל לחומרה ואכל לחומרה. Okay, Rabbi Akiva in this case was not follow, he didn't want to be mahmir for both Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. He was going to follow Bet Hillel. The problem is, in his version of the Mishnah, he wasn't sure which opinion was Bet Hillel and which opinion was Bet Shammai. He didn't know if Bet Hillel said the 1st of the month or the 15th of the month. And that's why he was mahmir out of safek. So it was out of safek, not out of chumrah, to follow two opposing opinions. Okay, that's very interesting that we know we have the Mishnah, but Rabbi Akiva, was in safek about the text of the Mishnah. We seem to know that what the established text is. Okay, so that's how we resolve that. But the principle stands that you shouldn't follow two contradictory rulings in principle, although you can follow two different opinions, two different authorities. All right, now back to our subject matter. Yatev Rav Yosef kameh de Rav Huna, veyatev ka'amar. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, mahloket beseratya mikan, useratya mikan, upelatya mikan, upelatya mikan. Okay, so Rav Yosef was saying this of Rav Huna, and they were discussing the braita that we had before. The braita we had before, remember, says that an alleyway that's open on both ends, right? According to Tanakh Kama, you have to put a doorway on one end and lechi and korah on the other end. That was the most lenient approach. And then Hananya came and said, no, you got to put a doorway, an actual door somewhere. According to Bet Hillel, on one side. According to Bet Shammai, on both sides. I'll say Bet Hillel, right? On one side. So that mahloket describes a case of an alleyway open on both sides. Now, this sage says, in the name of Rav Yehuda, in the name of Rav, right? Rav is first generation, Rav Yehuda is second generation, he's a student. Rav Yehuda, by the way, was a student of both Rav and Shemuel, and he's often teaches traditions in the name of both of his teachers. So Rav Yehuda was saying in the name of Rav that machloket regarding the open alleyway is only if there's a street, seratya. This comes from the Greek, stratos, same origin as our word for street. So that's a good translation. Pilatya, also as the origin of our word plaza, right? City square. Okay, good. So these are good derivations to know. So that machloket was if when there's a street on both sides and you have an alleyway that's open on both sides to the streets or to the plazas. That's when you need either a doorway on one side and ma'avoy on the other side, or the lechi on the other side, or you need to, according to Hananya, have a door, actual door on one side. Aval, sedatya mikan ubika'a mikan, but if you have a street on one side and an empty valley, right? The valley with the people don't usually walk in a valley. On the other side, bika'a mikan, or you have valleys on both sides, all the more so. Then everyone agrees you can follow the Tanakh Kama there. Even Hananya was usually Mahmir and says you need an actual door. In the case of there being a valley on one side or both sides, then you can just put a doorway, a door frame. Okay, good. So that's the statement of Rav. Hashta sedatya mikan. We just interrupt this and hold on a second. I have a question about this. Hashta sedatya mikan bikam mikan. Ose lo surat petach mikan. V'lechi v'kola mikan. Bikam mikan miba'ya. I understand if you have, right, you just told me if I have a street on one side and a valley on the other side, then I can follow the lenient opinion. So if I already know that, what if to tell me the case of if I have a valley on both sides? Isn't that obvious? All the more so that I don't need a door according to everybody. Right? So why bringing me the last case? I don't need it. We'll read it for clarity. So Rav's statement can be read as follows. If you have a valley on one side, it's like you have a valley on both sides. And so therefore, everyone will be lenient. Okay, so now back to the tradition. Now these two sages, right, Rav Yosef and Rav Huna were sitting. They said one tradition in the name of Rav Yehuda and the name of Rav, but then they said another tradition only in the name of Rav Yehuda. In other words, Rav Yehuda said it, but we don't know who he said it in the name of. And that tradition says, Im hayam mavoy kaleh lirchava en sarich kelum. If, let's say one side there's a street, but the other side, like in this, here's a street. On the other side of the mavoy is a rehava, a backyard. Okay, if it's a backyard, and the backyard, if the backyard is closed, then that's like a closed mavoy. Let's say the backyard has an opening, right? Then en tzadich kelum, you don't need anything. So in other words, even if it has an opening in the backyard is still considered a its own unit, and this is considered a closed mavoy, and therefore you don't have to put anything there. You can consider the backyard to be an enclosure, and this mavoy is closed. Okay, nothing is needed, mean nothing on this side. Obviously, you still need at least a beam on the front end that's open to the Shut Terabim. Okay, so that's the statement he said without quoting Rav or Shemuel. Now we're going to discuss who is he saying this tradition in the name of. Amar le Abaye Rav Yosef, ha de Rav Yehuda de Shmuel he. Has to be the opinion of Shemuel. Even though the previous statement that we just quoted above regarding the valley was in the name of Rav, this one cannot also be in the name of Rav. This one has to be in the name of Shemuel. Okay, why? Because if you say Rav, then you're going to have 2 points of contradiction. It's not really clear what the 2 points are, because it only brings one source. Some versions don't even have this word two. I think a simple explanation is, well, number one, it will contradict the statement he said up right here. There's a valley on one side. Sounds like a valley is what will make it closed off, but not something that's more habitable than a valley, right? And so, if it was this case, you could have said this case, and you could have figured a valley all the more so. But anyway, that's one point of contradiction, and the explicit one is the one as follows. Rav said this, Mavoy shenifras bimlo'o lechaser. Nifresa chaser kenegdo, chaser muteret umavoy asur. Mavoy that was opened in its entirety, the entire width, to a courtyard. And that courtyard itself is open. Basically, a case like this. Instead of a backyard, it's a courtyard. But basically the same thing. It's open, and the entire width of the mavoy is open, the same width as the back end. So it's a similar case. Chaser muteret mavoy asur. Chaser, you can still carry in the chaser, but you're not allowed to carry in the mavoy. So you see Rav here is machmir, and Rav Yehuda, right, statement said that you don't have to end on sarich klum, you don't have to put anything. So therefore Rav could not possibly be the author of that statement, right? Why in this case would be machmir? It should be the same as the previous case, where it was also permitted, where it was permitted. So therefore, I think it has to be Shemuel. Okay, so that was Abaye said. Rav Yosef says back to him, Ana layadana, says the truth is I don't know what the story is. However, there is a story. There was a certain shepherd's village that had such a mavoy, mavoy shekalid habahava. It was a mavoy that opens to a backyard. Rav Yehuda was there, and it was opened in this way, and he didn't require anything. And if you're telling me that it doesn't work according to Rav's opinion, then I'm fine with that. So we'll say it works according to Shemuel's opinion. All he knows is that there was an actual story, and Rav Yehuda did this, right? Once again, a lot of times we have a story and a statement that correlates, right? And in all these cases, I think it's correct to assume that the story came first, the story really happened, and then you don't always have to repeat the whole story, you extract the principle from the story. Rav Yehuda says in such a case, asur, right? And make a principle out of the story. So I think that's what happened here. We repeated the name of Rav, and then he says, when he's asked about it, he says, listen, here's the story. I know that Rav was there. He didn't say in the name of Rav, in the name of Shemuel. Actually, this makes sense. If the origin of this ruling was a story, right, Rav didn't say anything. He just said, it's okay, right? He just walked there. Whereas if it was a teaching, usually he says his teachings in the name of whoever he heard it from, in the name of Rav or Shemuel. So that could be why, in this case, we don't know who he said it in the name of. Okay, so we're still stuck that this statement must be only according to Shemuel. However, we're going to try a resolution that it can be even according to Rav. Hashtad amar le Rav Sheshat le Rav Shemuel bar Abba. Amri le Rav Yosef bar Abba. Asber Allah kan she'arebo kan shelo arebo. Rav aderav nami la kashya kan she'arebo b'nei chaser im b'nei mavoy kan shelo arebo. That's the end of the daf. Right, so we can explain it according to something that these other sages said regarding a different case. Depends on if you made an eruv or not. And so we can use that principle here in this case as well. Rav, when Rav said up above that this is, or here, right here, they said that's prohibited when you have an opening like this, right? In this kind of type of case with the courtyard. When he says prohibited, that's when there's no eruv. The people did not make an eruv between the mavoy and the courtyard, and so that's why it's two separate realms. And so you can't use this, right? That's considered an open mavoy, and it's no good. That's why he said it's no good. However, in this case, what Shemuel was talking about, which is also the case that Shemuel happened to Shemuel. In that case, there was an eruv between the courtyard and the mavoy, and all the different courtyards, and therefore, since it's all one reshut, one area. Therefore, the backyard, even though the backyard's open, but that's the backyard's problem, but there still is a backyard, and that's all together considered together with this. In that case, that's considered closed. The mavoy is closed, and since the mavoy is closed, you don't need anything. And based on that, we're able to resolve the statement of Rav Yehuda that can be according to Rav and according to Shemuel. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.